This episode of Vegan Soul Power Radio Hour is brought to you by you. If you enjoy this episode, please consider supporting the podcast at patreon.com/BennyTheVegan. A few weeks ago, in Appleton, Wisconsin, I attended a public demonstration, the aim of which was to educate the public on the most violent, abusive, and environmentally destructive industry on the planet, the animal agriculture industry. Displaying footage taken from inside egg hatcheries, dairy farms, and slaughterhouses, reactions from the public can be all over the place. Things can get confrontational.
The dog didn't listen, you kick it in the face.
You would kick a dog in the face?
And if you don't listen, if somebody doesn't listen to me, I kick him in the face. Winners win, losers lose.
But for many, confronting the violence we unknowingly consume at each meal can be heart-wrenching and even transformative. At this particular demonstration in Appleton, Wisconsin, I met Keevie. We spoke for over an hour, and our conversation was intense. YouTube seemed to agree. Comments began pouring in, praising Keevie for her open mind and kind heart. Since then, Keevie has undergone what she describes as a transformation, and I'm so excited to sit down with her and her son Hans for the third episode of Vegan Soul Power Radio Hour.
What's up, Benny? I'm stoked to be in your van.
Yeah.
Welcome to my van.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you. It's awesome.
Either of you done a podcast before?
No.
Okay, well, we have Keevie and Hans Bremhorst on the Vegan Soul Power Radio Hour in my van. First podcast for both of you, third podcast for me.
Oh my gosh.
And this is the first time where it doesn't feel like I'm completely out of my element.
Oh my gosh.
Like
You're
maybe
natural.
we have a chance here.
You're a natural.
And
Stop.
Keevie, you and I met first.
Yep.
Because Hans, we met a few minutes ago. Mm-hmm. You and I met about a month ago, like 4 or 6 weeks ago.
It's been at least 6, if not more.
Yeah, I'm not so good with time.
7 weeks.
Okay,
at
so maybe
least.
we met a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Here in Appleton, Wisconsin.
Right.
On the street. Right? We crossed paths having never met each other. Do you want to, in your own words, sort of describe our meeting? Would you be willing to do that?
I would love to.
Yeah.
Well, I was already pretty pumped up attending a beautiful music education program on the Avenue. And I'm leaving, and I thought I was already exhausted, but I'll tell you, all of a sudden I came upon the Cube of Truth people. And that was the Anonymous for the Voiceless group. And I was just, wow, take a look. What is this? And it was very cool how they stand with the 4 people, and they're all in black, and then they have the Anonymous mask on. And they had 4 different videos of pork and cattle, beef, chicken, eggs.
And so you had unknowingly walked into the
in.
middle of this,
Right.
You didn't know what, some kind of a demonstration.
And I really appreciate things like that. I love to see demonstrations, and if people are taking their time to come together to bring something up that is a hot topic, of course I stopped. And I stopped at the egg video.
Right. And so let me just kind of briefly to describe, I think there's a good chance most people who are listening to this know what a cube of truth is. Mm-hmm. But for the few people that maybe don't, I'll very briefly describe it as a form of vegan activism.
Sure.
That uses like human bodies in the shape of an outward-facing cube, and the people creating that cube are wearing masks and holding screens showing footage depicting standard practices in the animal agriculture industry.
Right.
So you were describing standing in front of one of those screens.
Correct.
That was showing footage from the egg industry.
Yes.
Cool.
And that's the only one I pretty much saw. Until the end, I wanted to take a peek. So just being in front of that one, which is probably the least of all of them, it was very interesting, but it was so fun meeting you. Because you have just such a natural way of drawing people in, and you're safe. And so you made me feel comfortable immediately to talk about, well, what do you see? What are you thinking about? What are you feeling when you're looking at this?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think you deserve an affirmation too, because I mean, it's really hard to just come up to someone on the street and be like, "Oh my gosh," you not even being vegan at the time and being like, "Oh, let me talk to you. Let me, get your contact information and have this relationship with you." And now here we are having this podcast, and it's like,
So true.
you bring people in too.
well, the whole situation was very life-changing for me. I mean, it truly was, and we can get into that a little bit later, but your approach, and I don't know if it is the same way for most of these Cube of Truth demonstrations, but whatever happened, it was a real, as we like to say, come to Jesus moment. And it was just a turning point for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is what you're describing is the experience that anyone who does probably any form of activism, certainly in the vegan activism community, and the community of people, honestly, all around the country, because I do a lot of traveling, people all around the country who are doing activism and having conversations with people. What you're describing is the experience everyone wants to find, right? Like we're all seeking out the compassion in people and the empathy in people and hoping that they can relate to the animal suffering, I should say the non-human animal suffering that we're depicting on these screens.
Right.
And like we're seeking that out in people. And as Hans said, you're giving me a lot of credit in this conversation, but I was so thankful to have found that in you.
Wow.
And we may have even discussed this when we were talking, but if you even watch back the video of us talking, there's so many people walking past without looking or maybe glancing and then continuing to walk. So I think it takes a very special kind of person. And I was hoping maybe you could even like expand on that. Maybe why you stopped when obviously so many people didn't or don't.
There's a couple of things. I think, first of all, most people by nature, whether it's the guy on the street handing out religious flyers or somebody handing out, come to my restaurant, and people just like, they don't want to be confronted, or the homeless person. No, I don't want to be confronted. I can't look at that. I got my blinders on. Don't stop me. I don't have any interest. I think true by nature, I'm a very curious person. So I do enjoy getting into those conversations with people, whether it's you or at the grocery store or whatever. But I have to say, thanks to this guy, Hans, right here.
What's up?
Hans started while he was in college. He started, or even before college, in high school. When Netflix became a big deal and everyone had access to all kinds of documentaries.
Are we talking about DVDs in your mailbox Netflix? Or are we talking about streaming online Netflix?
Streaming.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we ever
Netflix
did
as we know it today.
Yeah, as we know it today. But Hans had the time to start looking into things, and he can speak about when did he first become vegetarian and then going to veganism. But there were so many seeds already planted for it. And
for you, you mean?
Right, because of Hans's influence.
Yeah.
And as a mom and as a compassionate person, I wanted to always learn about what he was learning about. So I did watch a few videos, not a ton, but I had them in the back of my head. But they never really took hold until I had this conversation, this interaction with you. And I think it's just an accumulation of events that have happened. I do know, just even in the short time since meeting you, I feel so much passion for everything that I've learned and everything that I've seen that I want to now be able to talk about it. But I know that it is so delicate. I mean, from watching your videos and watching other people who are in the Cube of Truth or any of those other activists that are a little more aggressive, the minute you show any kind of aggression or come at it with your own agenda, it's a huge turnoff.
Right.
And I think that's a beautiful thing about Hans. I mean, I have a husband and another son who is older, 3 years older than Hans, and one that's 4 years younger than Hans. Hans is a total peacemaker, and he would never want to be in our throats, down our throats, and being aggressive towards what his beliefs are. And I actually remember a couple of times, I don't know if you remember them, but it was a few years ago where I felt like when there were family dinners sometimes and you were eating vegetarian, or I don't know if it was vegan at that point, but I could tell there were some times that you literally were tearing up because you were so disgusted with our waste, our gluttony with animal products.
You could tell that.
Oh, I could.
From the outside.
I could tell that he was really hurting inside.
Because that, and I know you just said there's so much in what you just spent the last couple of minutes saying. So
Let's unpack it,
yeah,
shall we?
I want to. I don't want to I don't want to fly past everything you just said.
Yeah.
But like the last thing you said about noticing Hans's experience as you could say as a vegan, as someone who is environmentally conscious, like there is so much there, and we have to put a pin in that.
Yes.
And come back to that.
Yes.
Before we get to that,
Right.
rewind a little more to where you were talking about like what it was in you that brought you to the Cube that day, the day we met. And we haven't actually mentioned clearly yet that our conversation is online.
Right.
Right. So for anyone who's listening to this but hasn't seen that video, our conversation is online on my YouTube channel, which is just Benny the Vegan.
Right.
And
What did you call it again? I always think the title
name of the video
was a little goofy. Because,
yeah, we have to talk about that too.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's so much.
What is something like this? Mom is a short.
Will
order.
this chef go vegan? And then earlier
Yeah.
today, I was watching the video with my girlfriend, and she was like, "She might not be an actual chef. She might
I'm
have
not
just
a
meant."
chef. I'm a mom chef.
Yeah, you said
And
in
a
the video
wife
you're a
chef.
short order cook, but then I was talking to my girlfriend, and she was like, "I think she just means she's like a short order cook for her family."
Right.
And I was like, "Oh,
That's why I
she's
was
not."
like, nobody's going to even know because
So
I was like,
did
we
call,
should rename it or something, but no.
I
it's
did
fine.
call the video "Will This Chef Go Vegan?" which that's spicy. Like you want to click on that video.
Right.
Turns out you're not.
a chef.
Not
well,
officially.
I am every day a chef, though.
Not
She's
by
a great
tra-
chef.
Not by trade.
She's my favorite chef.
Yeah, and I make different food for everybody in my family.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually bother me. It's
Yeah.
just because I, A, am blessed with the time for it, but B, it's important that each person really gets nourished the way they want to be nourished.
I mean, it sounds like you have this innate curiosity in like whatever anyone has to bring to the table or what anyone is needing. So you, for instance, you were describing earlier, one example would be walking past the Cube of Truth the day we
Right.
met. You were also
Right.
describing walking past someone who is homeless
Sure.
with like a cardboard sign. They're trying to convey a message, right? And then you were talking about someone on the street like proselytizing or trying
Right.
to convey a religious message. In all those instances, you're expressing like you would be curious.
I would.
You would want to know.
Right.
You would at least want
Unless
to hear
I
the
felt
message.
threatened in some way.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
And then you almost carry that into your home life too. It's like whatever is being needed in your home life.
Right.
It's like you're there to listen and to provide. Yeah. And then for some reason, what happened on the day we met, it's carried over. Like I'm sure it can't be true that every conversation you have with every stranger on the street.
No, Benny. It was, truly, you did such a great job. The way that you facilitate this interaction. And I noticed, you guys have a similar style from person to person.
Sure.
And it's good. You are really clever.
The style of communication.
Right. In terms of how you go through. And I've really been analyzing that quite a bit.
That comes out of lessons learned the hard way. Like,
Yes.
I think when you see people online communicating in the way I do, or I know we spoke on the phone, you were mentioning Earthling Ed, who's
Right.
an incredible communicator,
Sure.
and many other activists too.
Oh, yes.
I think everyone lands on some sort of similar style of communication by trying other ones,
Right.
and it not working.
Right.
And if you've clicked around on my channel enough, you've seen that I've gotten into some real arguments.
Right.
And I have raised my tone of voice. It's not productive. It might be a
Right.
fun YouTube video.
Right.
But those aren't the conversations that
That will make change.
create change.
Right.
And so you just end up learning either the easy way or the hard way. You end
Yeah.
up learning there is an effective way
Exactly.
of sharing ideas with people.
Exactly.
and hearing people. You have to hear people too, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so before any of this happened, Hans, the legendary Hans, on this video, so many of the
That's so
comments
funny.
were about you. I actually wrote some of them down. I want to go through some of those Hans comments.
All right.
I'll read them now. I want to ask you specifically about how, like, what it was like for you having a vegan kid before any of this, having Hans in the house. But right before that, let me read some of these comments.
Sure.
These are some of the Hans comments on the video. So in one of the top 3 comments on the video has over 3,000 views now. And
Wow.
one of the top 3 comments is, "Someone find Hans."
I know. I thought that was cool.
You got me.
And
Here I
actually,
am.
Here
I
he
know
is.
that person personally. It's another activist who has like 40,000 subscribers. He's like a very popular activist.
Wow.
He wanted me to find you.
Oh, that's so
So-
fun.
Well, you found me. I'm here.
His name's Ryuji. Ryuji, we found him.
What's up,
Ryuji?
Ryuji? Ryuji, shout
country?
out to you, man.
What country is he from?
He lives in California.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I like his name.
Then another comment was, "I hope Hans sees this." Someone says, "Hans, where are you?" One of the comments is, "Hans is the best vegan son."
Who am I, Waldo? Like,
I know, that's what I was just thinking. Where in the world is Hans?
Hans is
Hans
the
is
best
missing.
vegan son,
missing.
challenging the whole family. Someone says, "I'm sure Hans is on cloud 9." And then 2 more I wrote down. There's, "You made Hans's next family meal 10 times easier."
Yes.
And
it has gotten amazing since that
yeah.
video.
It's been
I mean,
amazing.
so
kitchen
has
has
it been
been
easier
transformed.
since then?
Yeah, I mean, it has. The intentionality for eating healthy and vegan has gone up significantly since that interview. Yeah.
Well, and it's a lot easier too because our oldest son Henry lives in Austin, Texas, and Jack is in college, and those are the two. Well, and my husband, those are the big meat eaters, and without them around, Hans and I pretty much 90% of what we have in the house now is vegan, and my husband, he will eat whatever I prepare, but then he will go out and bring home a big beefy meat pizza, or he'll have to get a gyro with double meat on it because he's like, where's the meat?
Yeah.
Where's the cheese?
Yeah, right. And so that sounds like something that probably sounds more familiar to Hans than it does
Right.
to you. Like maybe what you're describing is something Hans can relate to,
yes.
has been experiencing for a while now. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say it's accurate. I mean, in my personal experience, my family has always been very accommodating, and I know there are other families out there where it would be a lot harder.
Yeah. So you felt like accommodated, but also like earlier, Keevie, you were describing a certain, was it Thanksgiving, some holiday where you felt like Hans was struggling, right? Like, has there been a struggle for you, Hans, as like
Well,
the
I can
first
actually-
vegan in the family?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a bit of an integration, but I can remember specifically, it was New Year's. I forgot what year. And it was the year we had the biggest ocean marine die-offs in history as far as the biodiversity of the ocean. It was a record year for loss in the ocean. And it was New Year's, and we were at some sort of Japanese restaurant.
Yeah.
And we were getting tuna and
yes.
seafood and all these things.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, what a way to bring in the new year after we had the record marine die-offs or whatever, and thinking, this is impacting me. Like I have this emotional connection to what's happening, and it feels like maybe everyone just doesn't get it, or maybe they just don't care.
Yeah.
Or, how could they be so selfish or so thoughtless? And, we were talking about communication earlier, and it's kind of, this isn't true in all cases, but it's kind of like politics. Sometimes the dinner table isn't the place to talk about veganism.
Right. No.
Sometimes
Or
it's
politics,
the worst
yeah.
place
Yeah.
to talk about it.
I would
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
So there was that feeling of isolation there too, where I'm like, well, I don't really feel like I don't want to ruin everyone's meal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's so sad. I'm sorry.
It's not your fault.
No, I know, but I know you have struggled in the past with, I struggle now and before I even became vegan, just, there were many things that were off my list, but I was eating eggs and cheese, of course.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine, when the other boys are all around and all they want is sausage and cheese and bread and more sausage and cheese, and it's disgusting to me.
Is that recent, feeling that way?
Well, actually, no. And
that's a strong feeling. That's why I'm asking. Like, that's a strong reaction.
Well, I'll tell you what. We haven't had a holiday, and not the entire family has not been back together since this transformation. But even in the last couple of years, more from a health standpoint, as everyone is getting older, and my husband in his late 50s, and the two boys, just knowing all of the animal products that they're eating from a health standpoint, I was really worried and upset about it.
More recently, or even beforehand, you were worried about
beforehand.
Okay, you had concerns.
More from the
about
health standpoint.
Yeah,
it's you who turned me on to the serious cruelty and the whole morality issue of who are we to inflict this senseless cruelty on these innocent beings. And it really hit home to me.
Yeah.
So what the transformation for me since meeting you is opened my eyes to the industries and the way they really operate.
Yeah.
And that whole huge issue with what people see on the screens and on the packaging, and they think everything is honky-dory. But when you start investigating and you see what really goes on, it's so disturbing.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole health thing of what we're putting into our bodies. And I was listening to, is it Dr. Clapper?
Yeah,
You heard
Dr.
him?
Clapper, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I listened to some great stuff from him yesterday, as a matter of fact, on my drive.
On the long drive.
And I thought, my husband and my other sons need to hear this, because it really explains beautifully what these animal products are doing to us from a health standpoint.
Yeah. Wow. What you guys are describing is, I really think it's at the heart of almost the experience of almost every vegan I've met, and definitely at the heart of a lot of my own experience.
Sure.
Because it's really hard to be vegan or come into veganism, or you could say wake up to veganism in a sense.
Right.
And not at some point experience isolation. Mm-hmm. In large part, it's cultural. Mm-hmm. Like you're in a small group of the culture, and you're sort of operating against the cultural norm as a vegan.
Yes.
And I have lots of conversations with people say, oh, I'm from this part of the country. I'm from this other country. Meat's a big part of our diet there. And it's like, meat is the big part of the diet everywhere. Yeah. So you're kind of rebelling against your culture. And then beyond that, you end up inadvertently rebelling against your own family and your friends and in ways that are very like deeply ethical to you in a lot of ways. Like you almost feel like maybe that you share the same morals and ethics as your friends and family, but all of your friends and family are acting against their own ethics and morals, whether or not they realize it. This is something you and I talked about, Keevie, when we met, but like surely if Hans had walked in with like a golden retriever fresh out of the oven,
right,
like everyone would flip out.
Right.
Right?
I think that is such a great example to give to people.
Yeah.
Imagine your dog.
So for a lot of people being the idea of being vegan is just aligning the ethics that would, turn you off from eating that golden retriever, aligning that with your actions and holding any other animal to the same standard. If you're not going to eat the golden retriever fresh out of the oven, well, why are you eating the pig or the cow or the chicken?
Right.
And it can be, now you flip that around. Imagine you abstain from eating the golden retriever, but everyone else is eating the golden retriever. Like how that would feel.
Terrible.
Right. And not only that, but we have holidays that are centered around eating. I keep saying eating the golden retriever. I feel gross saying it, but I'm at the point now where I feel just as gross talking about it in terms of, I actually rarely use the word meat anymore. Like when it refers to eating meat, I'll just say eating animals. Because you just start to realize that the distinctions we draw between one animal and the next are arbitrary,
Right.
and that we use words as euphemisms. So instead of saying eating pig, we'll say eating bacon. Or instead of saying eating a cow sandwich, we'll say eating a hamburger or whatever it is. You know, we disassociate.
That makes me think of my older brother used to say something when we were eating meat, and he'd say, "Oh, I just like to imagine this animal out, you know, on the plains somewhere, but instead of skin, it's just meat." Like you can see the animal, but instead of skin, it just has meat, and I like to imagine it like that. And how what he might have unconsciously been doing is lowering the animal's status to just the status of meat.
Yeah.
And
You know what? If you ever go to Austin, you need to interview Henry, because for his 18th birthday...
That's one of your sons?
Yes,
Okay.
he's the oldest.
Okay.
For his 18th birthday, and before that, I don't know if it was how old he was, but his friends, his nickname is Meat. They call him Meat. Meaty. You're so meaty.
and mine was Junior Meat, and my little brother was Mini Meat.
Right. Or he's Double Bacon Junior Meat.
Yeah.
Is who he is. But he had an 18th birthday party in our garage, and it was called Meat Fest. And he had a picture of himself with a big steak on a fork, and there was a big poster, and he wanted to bring in all kinds of exotic meats. So he talked to different hunters that he knows, and he got some, I don't know, some snake, and some, there was one other.
Alligator.
Yeah, alligator. And it was like this buffet of meat, and everyone bought into it. And isn't this fun and funny and interesting and cool? And I was thinking, it would be really interesting to see
What did you think at the time?
What his thoughts are.
What did you think at the time?
Well,
It was awesome.
it was a fun celebration. I didn't touch any of it.
Yeah.
Because meat has always kind of grossed me out.
Okay.
For a lot of reasons. But it was a cool party.
Is it something you're seeing differently in hindsight? Like you were saying, Hans, it was dope.
Yeah,
Right,
in
like, at the
hindsight, it's like, wow, well, we thought it was the coolest thing ever, but now it seems so bizarre.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that is like such a great symbol for what you were describing now. You're saying there's holidays coming up, and you were describing seeing Hans's experience as the sole vegan. It's like you sort of wake up to something that was
Sure.
always in you,
Right.
but you had disassociated enough and kept the
Right.
blinders on enough to
Right.
just sort of function
Yes.
in this contradictory way. And you finally open your eyes, you observe these contradictions, and then a lot changes, right? Mm-hmm. And you were describing that.
Right.
You've been describing that.
Right.
That shift.
It's almost like I took up a new hobby. It's way more than a hobby. But literally when I left you, I knew in my heart that something changed in me. And it was a pivotal point that I left there. Remember I said, oh, I'd love to have a challenge. And you pulled out your card and you say, oh, you got to do the 22-day vegan challenge.
Challenge 22.
I'm like, oh, I got this. Because that's how I've always been. You know, if I have a challenge in front of me, I just have to flick the switch and go, I'm on.
Did you do challenge 22?
Well, I signed up for it, but I
okay.
didn't really need to.
Okay.
I mean, I went full on go with my own research.
You did?
I mean, almost
Wow.
every day I spent some time looking online, looking at videos. I love those conversations,
Yeah.
whether it's you or any other of the vegan activists.
Yeah.
If I'm driving, I listen to those conversations
Yeah.
because I love seeing it from all angles.
Yeah.
I've watched all the videos that were on your card. I haven't watched any of the or read any of the books, but is the one book you told me the other day, Comfortably Unaware? Did you tell me about that?
No, I don't think we.
Does that sound like a book on veganism?
It sounds like it could be. I
to
haven't
remember.
heard of it, but that would be a
we
good
need to-
title.
we need to- we
if it's
need
not,
to-
we should write that book. That's a nice title.
Comfortably Unaware.
Yeah. Another a term similar to that I find myself using a lot to describe like living in like the non-vegan world we live in is willful ignorance. And I
Oh,
think
sure,
people
I like
practice
that.
willful ignorance.
Yeah.
I mean, and when I say people, I also refer to myself having
yeah.
lived the majority of my life as a non-vegan. So
Right.
and that's the thing, like when vegans talk, like, so now we're 3 vegans, right? Would you identify as vegan now?
I do.
Okay, cool. So
I feel really strongly about it. I don't know that I would ever necessarily go back, but you never know. I mean, I'm still a newbie. I really am.
You're learning a lot, and you've learned a lot in a small amount of time.
Right.
You're like still informing yourself.
Right.
So let's say as 3 vegans, it's very easy for the conversation to feel like an us versus them thing. It's the easiest thing.
Right.
And in doing so, you just forget that the them was you for your whole life.
Right.
And nothing inside of you changed.
Right.
It's just you started acting differently.
Right.
In a way that maybe better represents something that was in you the whole
Right.
time.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that we all put blinders on. People don't want to know what we're really eating because it's so culturally the norm.
Yeah.
And, you know, it would be fun to hear what you have to say with your friends. I mean, you were in an environment where I have to believe a lot of your friends were vegan, but I have spoken with several friends since this moment in time who, oh my gosh, I can't watch that. I can't watch any of that. I just won't. I just can't watch it.
You're trying to show stuff to people?
Well,
who don't
I'm
want to see?
recommending it.
Yeah.
You know, if a friend comes over and I just say, hey, you know, something really interesting has happened. And do you know about what's going on? And I just maybe mention a few things.
Yeah.
And when they hear about animal rights activism and all that, they immediately get shut it down.
You're swimming upriver for sure.
I mean, even my mom the other day, I don't know if she'll ever watch this or not, but, you know, we were talking on the phone, and I said, Mom, I'm so excited to come and visit you guys this next week, and I really hope that you'll sit down with me and let me show you the videos that I've watched. And then she got really bitter with me, and she, you know, I mean, she's a lovely lady and everything, but she said, those gosh darn Netflix and all those documentaries, it's all fake news and it's all... I'm like, okay, you sound like Donald Trump. My God.
Strong
Anyway,
reaction
sorry.
there.
Strong reaction. I said, Mom, it's not just Netflix. If you start investigating, it's in all kinds of platforms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
What kind of conversations have you guys been having, you know, for the last couple months since the meeting, since the conversation? Like, what have you guys, and either of you, like, just take it away. Like, is this something you guys been talking about? Has been unspoken? Like,
it really rekindled the fire. You know, it's always kind of been a present energy of trying to eat less animal products, but it really ramped up the whole like culture in our family since that meeting.
really?
You know what's
Yeah.
cool about it? We didn't even need to talk about it. It was enough talking. We moved right into action.
Yeah. That's amazing.
I mean, truly. And it's so fun having someone who really appreciates the food that you make and have someone to enjoy it.
Were you surprised, Hans? Like, did this come out of left field for you?
No, honestly, I think that it had been a long time coming.
Yeah.
And one of my biggest takeaways is that when it comes to going vegan, it's not necessarily going to be everyone going cold turkey from this place of, oh, my nickname has meat in it, to, oh, now I'm going vegan. It's about taking a risk from wherever you're at.
Right.
And taking that next step from wherever you're at.
Right.
Right? So I think for you,
Right.
you have come a long way where going vegan kind of was your next logical course of action.
Right.
It was the next step from where you were at, and that might be why your walls were down that day that you met Benny and you were able to
Sure.
to take in and be vulnerable.
Yeah.
It's like there had been this foundation laid already by who knows how long of your being around Hans,
Right.
just being in proximity to him.
Yes.
Maybe some conversations.
Right.
And I hope that like other people can find comfort in that, because I think a lot of vegans feel a lot of like frustration and anger at the people around them, like not being vegan, like, you know, their parents or their siblings.
Right. Right.
And I don't know, I hope that they can like recognize that just by being themselves, like
Yes.
that's
Yep.
impactful.
Yep.
Just by leading by example and doing what they think is right and
Right.
being kind and respectful, like
Yes.
that impacts people. That people notice that.
You know, the one thing is a lot of people have all kinds of family and lifestyle challenges to make becoming vegan a real pain in the butt. That it's difficult. It's too time consuming. You have to think ahead about what you're eating.
Yeah.
Because for me, if I don't have food readily available, I used to be very prone to grabbing sweets or comfort food. And we talked about that in the previous video.
You grab what's ready and what's easy.
For me, right. I mean, it's the addictive personality comes out, and I'm just going to go back to that, stuff. Yeah. So now the thing that's been successful for me is really and truly thinking about what are you going to get when you go to the store? What are my main go-tos that are going to always be around and easy for me to grab?
Yeah.
And it's not always just vegetables and fruit. There's a lot of other super fun things to eat. And I think that if young kids could understand, if they're in a whole family full of meat eaters, they need to take some extra initiative to think, well, what am I willing to do? I can't necessarily expect my family to provide for me this extra thing. So if in your job you grab an extra $50 a week and you investigate, well, what are the things that can become your new comfort food?
Yeah.
Things that are healthy for you, and take ownership in it and provide it. Maybe introduce your parents to it.
Right.
I got that bitchin' sauce, it's called, which I want to make sure everyone knows about it. It's so good. That's changed both of our lives. Whenever we need something that is so amazing, we just slap a little bitchin' sauce on it.
Bitchin'.
It is so good. Whoever bitchin' sauce is, I hope that you see this, because it has transformed.
Yeah.
It can transform anything. I don't know all the ingredients, but it's really healthy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And I think the fear of change, I say this a lot.
Yeah.
But the fear of change is what makes things difficult. The actual change is not as hard as the fear of change. And so for me, before I was vegan and my girlfriend was starting to talk about it, my anxiety level definitely rose a little bit, and I was immediately defensive, and I was quick to turn a blind eye, because the fear of that kind of change felt like this massive undertaking.
Yes.
It held me back. And the same was true even after going vegan. It's the fear of now having to accommodate myself in these social situations or at family functions. That felt like it was going to be hard.
Right.
It's not. It's not really that hard
bad.
once you develop some sort of little rhythm. For a while before I was, doing a podcast, or even before I was doing much activism, I was a sound guy for a wedding band. And so we would, a large regional wedding band. It's 11-piece band. So we go to neighboring states, and sometimes, as far as Texas or something like that.
Wow.
And do these large weddings and corporate events. And they were all catered, which for pretty much every other band member was this huge perk.
Right.
And whatever the guests were eating, they would also get. And so it was this fancy wedding and corporate event food, which meant, ribs and steak and all these other. Yeah, I wouldn't touch any of it.
Right.
I didn't like being around it.
Right.
So I would go to these events with my own cooler bag.
Yes.
And I'd have a chickpea tuna salad and some, pasta with vegan sausage in it, and, a bunch of stuff. I'd overpack. I'd do overnight oats for the morning, because we would do overnights a lot. And what ended up happening was the exact opposite of what I thought. A lot of the band members ended up being envious of my grocery haul, because they'd be waiting around for their one meal to be served at mealtime.
Yep.
And that was the one meal that was guaranteed. The rest of the trip was fast food and whatnot. And I had my grocery haul for the whole trip.
It's so awesome.
Right. And so I could have just stood up at every meal and protested the consumption of animals, but instead it was I'm just going to go over here and eat my delicious food. I think that might have had a bigger impact than...
What better to celebrate the union of a couple than the slaughtering of animals?
Oh, God. Don't get me started, Hans. I know.
Speaking of weddings, I went to a couple weddings this summer, and right when it was probably 5-6 days after I met you, and I decided this is it. I'm vegan now.
Dang.
I went to this wedding in Iowa. Beautiful, gorgeous wedding, but it was the typical Iowa food. And every item that was there, except for, I don't know I can't remember, they had beans or whatever, but it was all meat-based products.
There's probably meat in the beans.
And I actually,
Lard or something.
I was a little embarrassed with myself,
Yeah.
but the only thing I took was the fruit.
Yeah.
And everyone's eating their big piles of mashed potatoes and gravy and
Yeah.
dead carcass. No, I shouldn't say that. It was beautiful.
Oh, that is what it
And
is. It
I
is.
know.
It's objectively true.
I was a little bit embarrassed. I thought, oh my gosh, okay, you need to strategize on this, because if you know you're going to somebody's house and you don't want to be rude. And so I employed the strategy for the next wedding that I just went to this past weekend. And right before I had to leave, I made myself just a massive, fabulous veggie, not a burger, a quesadilla.
Oh,
yeah, a
yeah,
wrap
yeah.
quesadilla. And I totally had everything that I needed before I left for the event, so that A, I wouldn't be starving, and B, I wouldn't feel as if I didn't have anything to feed myself. And I felt so much better.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be thinking about
So
that
great.
before I go to people's houses for dinner. Just eat what you can beforehand, and maybe bring a few snacks or make something to share that is vegan.
That's a great way, I think, to open it up and turn what feels like this isolated, restrictive lifestyle into something that's welcoming.
Right.
Yeah, you just make a little extra.
Yeah.
And you can offer it. My family has done that the last couple of years for like the family Christmas, which truthfully is getting harder and harder for me every year. But like my mom made this huge pot of vegan African stew. It's like way more than her and I could have eaten. But it was just available to everyone. We also prepared this vegan charcuterie board. So we did 4 or 5 different types of vegan cheese. So like the cashew cheese, different nut cheeses and stuff, and crackers and grapes and pistachios. And we just put it out, and it's...
Do you make your own cheese? Or I haven't really seen any good brick cheese yet, because that is something my 2 boys love, is the charcuterie trays. And
You've got a treat in store.
Yeah. So where do you find good block cheese that you could slice for? I mean, obviously the cream ones are easy enough to make.
So I'm not from Appleton, which is where we are right now. So, but I know that what's it called? Free Market.
Yes.
I think they've got some stuff. I'll tell you the 2 brands that I see most often.
Right.
One is Miyoko's. It's Miyokos.
Yes.
They do really good
Okay.
hard cheese to put on crackers and stuff. And the other is Tree Line.
Okay.
And they also do a really high quality cashew cheese. And it's like theirs is a little softer, but it's a hard cheese.
Have you found that in Appleton?
I think that Free Market has one of those.
Okay.
And in general, a lot of the better grocery stores will have them. But sometimes not only, like when I lived in Nashville, there was a grocery store called Kroger. It was everywhere. They had a great selection of
that's good to know. They've got Kroger in Detroit, where I'm going next. So.
Yeah. The thing with vegan cheese, it's the same as non-vegan cheese in the sense that the more you pay, the fancier it's going to be, right? You could go get a can of Cheese Whiz, and that's not... it's going to be dirt cheap, and you wouldn't serve that at a party.
Right.
You could go get some super expensive, smoked Gouda, or I don't know, something fancy.
Sure.
It's going to be like $20 for a block. It's the same with the vegan cheese world.
Sure.
If you shell out, you're going to get something awesome.
Yes.
That's kind of how it works.
Hans, how about you in your experiences with friends or being places? How has it impacted you when you don't feel as if there's any food for you? Or when you're with a bunch of people that are eating meat and does it feel uncomfortable or awkward or put you in a bad place? How does that feel?
Well, I think that I honestly don't run into it that often anymore. Most of the friends and the people that I dine with are extremely accommodating.
Sure.
I'd say I run into it more at restaurants and bars and stuff, or places that, you really have to scrounge to find something vegetarian on the menu.
Right.
I don't know if I have very strong feelings about I feel isolated when I don't see something for me on the menu.
Sure.
It's just kind of like, this is the world I live in, and this is the decision I'm making. And there's something that feels grounded about being that one person sometimes. You know, something that feels like, oh, like, yeah, this is a decision that I'm making because I love myself, and it's just, it kind of feels good, like, sometimes.
Right. Yes.
You know, even
yes.
to run into that situation.
Yes.
Where you're like, everyone else is on this path, but I'm like, there's something rewarding about it.
Yes.
Even.
I
Being
agree
caught in
with
that.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It gives you an opportunity to be an example, and you're so peaceful by nature that, you know, we can, I think that is something that lends itself as another chalk one up for not putting any cruelty by eating animals into your body. And you said that during the Cube of Truth.
I was going to bring that up too. What Hans just said reminded me of that moment.
Right. And you said it must feel really good, or it feels really good not to put some kind of evil.
Yeah, I have it written down actually, that quote.
And I want you to know, I feel great.
Yeah,
I do.
You said you must feel very peaceful. There's got to be a peace that comes over you once you surrender to that. That's what you said.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I feel you just described, Hans. There's this notion that going to a bar with friends, and like the scary thing is that there won't be anything. You can't order anything.
Right.
It doesn't happen that much, but it happens. And that's like the big fear. What do I do in those moments? But I think you just said it perfectly. It's like that's almost the most grounding of moments. It really like strengthens your resolve, and it reminds you why you do what you do as a vegan. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, well, that's where the commitment is tested, right? Because if it's in a world where it's totally catered to you and it's super easy, I mean, sure, that'd be great. I would like that, but that is where your commitment is tested, and that's kind of where sometimes that's kind of where you get that reward, like the little pat on the back for being vegan, you know? I mean, it kind of sounds weird to say that way, but that's kind of when you get that feeling of ground. I would call it groundedness.
Yeah.
Benny, when did you decide to become vegan?
So I went vegan about 4 years ago.
Okay.
How about you, Hans? How long has it been for you?
Well, I've been on and off with vegetarianism.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long had that been going on? Was there like a firm
that started
switch where it was like, oh, I'm vegan now? Did that happen at one point?
It happened, but it was a series of steps. You know, there's this whole next step. Like I took a risk from where I was at each time.
Yeah. It was incremental.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was 4 years ago, and it was very different from that for me. I had been pescatarian because, I was like, well, I love animals.
Right.
So why am I know they're healthy vegetarians, and I like animals, so why am I eating them? So I kind of just did pescatarian because I didn't count fish.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, fish don't smile. They don't blink. They don't care.
Right.
I think something like that is where my head was at.
Right.
It didn't take me long to evolve from that to total vegetarian.
Yes.
Because I just sort of recognized that I was creating some arbitrary distinction. Like, oh, so animals that don't smile don't matter. I don't know. For some reason, they were different enough that I chose not to value their life. And then I realized that didn't sit well with me.
Sure.
Then I was vegetarian. That lasted for a little while. And then, as I mentioned earlier, my girlfriend, Ari, was starting to hear about veganism and talk to me about it. And I knew exactly what it was because the college I went to had a really high population of vegans. There was even a vegan cafe at the college I went to. And even though that was my favorite place to eat on campus, I still thought veganism was so dumb. And I had tried to ask vegans what it was all about. Like, I wanted to understand it.
Yeah.
I don't think they did a great job of explaining it to me. And so I was just like, there's literally no point. So even as a vegetarian, I was like, there's not a point to being vegan. It's grounded in some empty sort of like purist mentality that serves no purpose.
Right.
But she was getting curious about it. She was talking to me about it. I was like putting my head in my hands, like, oh God, the vegan thing again. And then we watched the documentary Cowspiracy together.
Yeah.
And I went into it total skeptic. And as the credits were rolling, I turned to her and I said, well, we're vegan now. And it was just like, that's all it took. And, and I say it like it was this simple thing, but it was a simple, profound thing. Because when I saw that movie, not even thinking about animals at that point, I realized, wow, like the largest threat, the largest thing threatening human existence and the future of life on this planet
Yes.
Can be solved right now
Yes.
with breakfast and lunch
Yep.
and dinner. Like just what I eat in a day is the single largest impact
Right.
any person can have on
Yes.
saving the world. Like I can literally save the world
Right.
with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So
Yes.
it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and it was vegan overnight. And I've learned a lot since then. I couldn't have told you on that day what was unethical about, backyard chickens, for instance. I couldn't have told you anything about the dairy industry. I learned that later. But that's sort of how it happened for me.
Yeah. The third topic is what you just brought up, and that is the whole environmental impact of not eating meat products and fish. And there again, that in and of itself is a huge, huge part of making the choice to become vegan. As much, obviously, for me, I mean, I've always loved animals, but I've never really had a pet for any long period of time.
Yeah.
And that of course hits you in the gut when you see that. But the most important thing that is on most people's mind is what is happening with our climate and our planet. And I'd love to see way more of that argument being in the forefront of everybody's minds, that they don't understand the whole situation.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Let
Can
me check
we?
the cameras real quick. I don't want to lose video. I lost the video feed of podcast already because I didn't check it. So let me just go check real quick.
I think so many of us feel so helpless. Like, what can I do? What can I do?
Did you know about that from Hans or from something you've watched more recently?
Well, everyone knows what's going on with climate change. And, I've always heard that, of course, eating animals is, there's a huge problem, and that feeds into why things are really messed up with our environment and the greenhouse gases and the
Yeah.
whatever. Okay, so I have to learn way more about that.
Yeah,
but it is very empowering to know, wow, if I stop eating meat products, how many animals am I saving in a year? The statistics are really crazy on some of this stuff.
Yeah. That's a big one for you too, Hans, right?
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking right now is that everyone's got their why. Like, why did you go vegan? Why did you go vegetarian? And a lot of times people are just interested to hear what the different reasons are. And for me, when I first went vegetarian, that was my reason. And if I kind of want to go into like my process, because that was my number one reason going into it. And I found that all the different whys along the way had become so much more potent. Things that when I initially went vegetarian, I was like, oh, well, that's not my reason. My reason is the environment.
Yeah.
And I've incorporated all the other reasons, and they're like just as potent now.
Yeah.
But what happened for me is when I was, if I could just go into my process here.
Yeah.
When I was in late high school, I got a laptop. And so I watched a bunch of documentaries on the environment, and I had this real, I fell into that despair. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the world is dying.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I kind of started to experience that grief.
Yes, it was visible.
Yeah.
It was really visible.
And that grief, I think, is the next bravest step going to be for most people, is starting to touch into like the pain behind all these reasons.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm going to go to school for environmental science.
Wow.
So that's what I did. I went to school and I was in college, and during my sophomore year, at the very beginning, it's 2014, I had a vegetarian friend who was like, hey, come to New York for this huge climate march. It was the first People's Climate March in 2014. And it was like, I watched this little video on it, and it's like, this is going to be the biggest environmental action ever, and come change the world on September so-and-so we're going to change it. We're going to ring the bell on climate change. And
you're like, this is exactly what I've been waiting for.
This is it. I'm getting on this bus. I don't even think I told my mom and dad. I'm like, I'm going to New York.
Yeah.
And so me and several of my friends went on this bus and to this huge climate rally. And while we were there, I remember I saw this sign this guy had. It was a very courageous sign.
Yeah.
And it said, "Poser environmentalists eat meat."
That's really good.
wow.
Yeah, and it was at this climate rally where you could easily just have your toes in the water and think, oh, I'm going to go to this huge climate rally. And then you see this sign that says, "Poser environmentalists eat meat." And I guarantee the majority of people there ate meat.
Yeah, yeah.
And so everyone's seeing this sign and thinking, shit,
Wow.
damn it.
That's impactful. Wow.
It's impactful, and there's nothing soft about that message when
Right.
you put it in those terms.
Yeah.
So what do you remember did you even know how to process that sign? Like, did you know what it meant? Like,
Well, I knew he was right because I'd
You
been
did, okay.
learning about things and studying things, and it felt like that breach in integrity where I was like, dang it, he's right. I don't want it to be true, but it's right. And so me and two of my friends looked at each other and we said, what is the biggest impact we can have on our environmental footprint right now, today? Like, we're at this climate rally. How are we going to leave here and walk the talk?
yeah, there it is.
And we were like, we're going vegetarian. Boom.
awesome.
That's it.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. And so we held each other to it, and we were like, if the first one who doesn't make it's a loser or whatever, you're just like a little bitch or something like that.
But like, you were holding each other accountable. Like,
And that's the
there's
thing.
so much value in that.
Exactly. And we were holding each other accountable because what it takes is for people to hold each other here. Because, when you have that isolation, eventually a lot of people are going to break.
Yeah.
Right?
And that, I know that this isn't what you meant to convey when you said that, but to me, what you just described is also one of the many most impactful things about activism, is because so many of the vegans, I'd say most of the vegans I know through activism. And, my girlfriend and I, we travel in this van, or go all over the country, doing it all over the place.
Right.
We meet a lot of people, and a lot of the people we meet have either never met a vegan before, or are the only vegan in their family and didn't know any other vegans until getting involved. So I think even you two now, being two vegans together in a family, you're sort of a minority group within veganism. A lot of vegans really feel alone
Yep.
in their family, in their friend circles.
Right.
And I know for a lot of people, and for me, it was this too, activism is the door you walk through
Yep.
to join a community of people that
Yes.
not only hold you accountable, but support you.
Yes.
And love you and care for you and understand you without you having to explain yourself. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yes.
So it's almost maybe accountability isn't the best word for what you get, but the power of community and of having friendships.
Yes.
I think, come on in. We got to knock
in.
on the door.
Let's see who's here.
Hey!
Randy!
Randy!
Hey, what's
That's
up?
Benny! Come in!
What's going on, Randy?
Can you spare a couple
Want
minutes?
to just squeeze in here?
There's
time. I
no,
gotta
just for 5 minutes.
I gotta go downtown. I gotta be at council at 7:30.
Oh.
Dang. Well, another time.
But I'm not vegan yet.
Well, that's why it'd be
all right.
fun to
I wasn't
talk to
vegan
you.
most of my life either.
You sure
don't let
have-
any vegan tell you
You
otherwise.
live in here?
Yeah, this is where I live.
Awesome. I was wondering what the heck this is all about.
Yeah. We
Yeah,
got
were you like, what is
the
this?
kitchen, the bed.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
The steering wheel.
The steering wheel. Hans is sitting on the toilet right now, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's a toilet in here?
Yeah, it's right under there. Cool. So we met the third Bremhorst.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm too bad he couldn't come and sit down
It's
for a
too
few
bad.
minutes.
Oh, it's too bad. I mean, talking about adjustments,
Yeah.
I was thinking it is, and that's neat that you were talking about community. And it's hard now. I'm noticing, not that I'm saying there's any tiptoeing around or anything, but makes me feel kind of sad and slightly, I'm completely solid on the way I feel, and I know how I'm going to choose to eat.
Yeah.
But it kind of creates a little bit of a barrier there
Yeah.
when I know I'm eating something terrific and I'm not going to be cooking up some meat for my husband anymore. I know there's going to be people who are like, no, that's totally wrong. I'm going to make fabulous, awesome vegan food, but he's going to have to get his meat somewhere else.
Was it hard coming to that decision? Because when we first met, one of the things you said to me is that, you were describing being a line cook for what I now understand is the family.
Right.
But you were describing kind of cooking all different kinds of food for different members of the family. You were saying I'll cook a funky grain, and then I'll do vegetables, and then for some members of the family we'll cook meat.
Right.
That when we really last met, that was our conversation.
And that is really how it's been, right? The whole, always. It's harder. I am way more of a short order cook when all the kids are home. Mm-hmm. But now that it is just Randy and I at home, I know that he can get his meat when he's out. Yeah. He can have something at lunch that's meat or whatever. But I'm not going to start cooking up steaks or chicken for him if he wants that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Was
it hard to decide that, or
no?
Was it a decision that made itself?
Yeah, I didn't even think about it. I'm like, that's the way it now is.
Wow.
He's a big boy.
Yeah.
He can do what he wants to.
Yeah.
But he is loving the food I'm making.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. We have some pretty good stuff that we love to make.
So what are some of the favorites? What are you making a lot these days, or what's been a big hit?
Well,
I'm about to get envious. I can feel it coming.
We've made a couple of really awesome tofu dishes, which, I know everyone's like, oh, well, tofu, blah, blah, blah. But we've made some really great. There was one stir fry that I made that had sort of a spicy sriracha peanut butter sauce that the tofu was kind of slightly fried in. And then there was wonderful veggies with it.
That was really good.
Yeah. And then there was another one that was really, great. You mentioned an African peanut soup. I was looking for a recipe that I once had. And that is so great. I'd love to incorporate. I've always loved soups.
Yeah.
And have been pretty creative with them, but I think I will be more so now. I try to stay away from eating too much bread or gluten products, but we love the sprouted grain products that are out there, the Ezekiel tortilla. I've always got those ready to go. And so no matter what, you can be slapping all kinds of vegetables on there, and hummus and bitchin sauce and sprouts, and we're even growing our own little microgreens now. And so that is something that has become like a comfort food for us.
Maybe it's because you've been accommodating Hans for so long, but you talk about making vegan food like someone who's been vegan for a long time. Well, you sound way more experienced than I did.
Well, I've always loved to cook really healthy.
And I was doing peanut butter jellies early on, and I was figuring out how to cook. Like, what do you do with lentils? I didn't know, and I didn't know what to do with tofu. It was breakfast cereal. For a while, I was just getting by, and I had to figure out. Right. Yeah, my girlfriend took to it much better than I did. She was more of a natural, and I had to figure out what the heck.
Well, I'm still, to be honest with you, even more so, I do feel like I'm in that honeymoon period where I'm realizing I need to up my game so that because I don't like looking at recipes. I like to just throw stuff together creatively. Yeah. And I haven't worked with tempeh too much yet. And I know there's some other things. We've been doing like red lentil pasta. There was a great red lentil dish, or, doing the stuff with the zucchini, where you shred it or make it into like pasta. So
I just want to say, I feel like what happened, like what's happened for you is anyone who does like the style of activism that I do, so like street outreach, although not even anyone who does any form of vegan activism, I would say. Right. You're sort of like the dream person to come across. It's like, and earlier in the conversation, you were like complimenting me on my style, but I don't feel comfortable taking the credit. I try my best to do a good job when it comes to communicating with people, but you don't get to choose who you talk to.
Right.
If someone comes up to you and wants to get angry and defensive,
Right.
or wants to dismiss you, you don't get to decide that.
Yeah.
So you don't choose who you talk to.
Right.
And like meeting people who are just, as you described yourself, who are just curious and interested and willing to empathize with someone they've been eating their whole life.
Right.
That is like, you don't get to decide to talk to that person or not. You just do or you don't. And like, I lucked out getting to talk to you, but you are who like everyone wants to talk to. But I also wanted to ask you a question about that. A lot of vegans, I would say most vegans, don't do activism.
Right.
And for a lot of vegans, maybe they kind of want to, but it's
Yes.
scary
Yes.
and intimidating to do activism. And so as someone who like stumbled into a bunch of activists in the middle of the street on a Saturday afternoon or whatever it was.
This is a great thing, because this is actually the next thing I wanted to talk about. When it finally hits you and you just know in your heart, this is the choice I'm making, and let the chips fall where they may. You don't have to be a street activism or what was the name of that friend of yours that you had mentioned, the girl who recently went and stole bunnies out of a...
Oh, yeah.
Right, which,
Amy, I think it was Amy's... Oh, but the bunnies was Mythical Mia.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I mean, talk about in your face. I mean, I'm sure nothing that's great, because she's got her own style, and,
Yeah.
and it's a little more confrontational. I mean, we'll leave that at that. But
Sure. It's
just...
certainly one of the more intense forms of activism.
Right. I think anyone who is going to be vegan, whether they want to be an activist or not, they are and will be confronted, even if it's only their spouse or their children or a good friend. You're going to get poo-pooed constantly. And that's one of the reasons why I have all of a sudden thought, well, how am I going to explain myself? And I want to be able to discuss it logically and be able to affirm what I've learned and why this has touched my heart so much. So now I am going to Detroit to visit all my family members, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pushback and maybe making fun of and I wanted to start looking at more things to learn, so that if it came up in discussion, I would be able to talk well about it and informed, like an informed person. And speaking of ideas, I had another really fun idea, and I don't know, tell me what you think.
Yeah.
Sadly, you're leaving town, but I thought, there's a lot of people who love learning about things. I mean, look at, the great courses and the this and the that. I thought, how cool would it be for you to be a guest? Like, let's say in my home, I invited 10 friends over, and we were having some wine and some vegan hors d'oeuvres.
Yeah.
And you come in and you do an hour presentation.
Right.
And I'm helping to facilitate activism by bringing you in. And then I'm building up a community around me of other people. We could share recipes and this and that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're touching on like something super important.
Yeah.
Most vegans are passionate about being vegan in one way or another. Like Hans was describing it as almost an act of self-love.
Yes.
And it grounds him and his
Oh my gosh,
values.
I got the chills.
Right? And, and then it becomes this like very meaningful part of who you are and like how you self-define. So you want to be able to communicate about it. At the very least, if someone asks you a question, you want to feel confident in like communicating that.
Right.
And then where I'm going with this is there's so many hundreds of ways of, quote, being an activist.
Yes.
And one of those ways, and one way that I applaud, is like the slaughterhouse shutdowns and civil disobedience. Like unbelievable form of activism. And then there's also street activism, the way we met.
Yes.
But there's also what you're saying, having your friends and or colleagues over for dinner and like or a presentation,
learn about it.
or have them over to watch a movie, or whatever it is. Give a presentation yourself, cook a meal for people, start an Instagram page, whatever it is. There's so many ways to sort of figure out how to communicate this thing that you care about.
Yes,
and I I think like seeing activists online maybe deters people from being active because they think the only way to be an activist is to go lock down a slaughterhouse for 17 hours.
Right.
And that is not the only way. And all of them are important.
Right.
They're all important and valuable.
They are. I mean, though I have a debt of gratitude to those people who really risk life and limb sometimes to get in there and to take what comes at them when they're doing something so aggressive. But sometimes it's that type of activity that gets, the big players to take notice.
It's like Hans was saying earlier, everybody's different and everyone's going to respond to something different. So like, you have more to say on that?
Yeah, well, what I was thinking about the activism, it's the same with the reasons why for going vegan. Everyone's going to have their different way of being an activist. And wherever you're at, it's going to be one of those things where it kind of chooses you. Like maybe being an activist is just you going and visiting your family and saying, hey, I'm vegan now, and finding the least violent way to just exist among them. And maybe you don't go in trying to even convince them of anything. Maybe being there and coexisting with them and bringing that into their space is going to have an amazing impact.
Sure.
And you'll be an activist in that way.
Right.
Maybe for someone else, they have this fire or inspiration to go and do something else and take action, and that can be a medicine for them.
Right.
Because some people aren't going to be able to just sit quietly,
Right.
Maybe the person who goes in and does something direct to a particular slaughterhouse has even less impact than you just showing up at your family.
Right.
But maybe, so it's kind of for you. It kind of chooses you in a way.
Sure.
Is my thought on that.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I mean, I loved watching you with the whole Cube of Truth thing, but I think there are so many ways, big, whether it's a corporate event or, just anything. That Dr. Clapper who goes out now and he said his main goal in life as a doctor is to travel around the country, hoping that the education, the curriculum is taught about what meat products really do to our bodies.
Right, like health activism almost.
Yes. As the last 2 months have gone by, that's all I keep thinking about is ways in which I can help the cause. And obviously, from a personal standpoint, doing that by just changing my habits is one great step. And then I keep thinking about ideas. Well, how could I have a little bit of role as an activist?
Yeah.
I think it would take a while to learn enough to do something like you're doing, but just even holding meetings at your house and having it a fun food fest and bringing in a speaker like you to make it fun and to talk about all those touch points that we have talked about during this podcast, or volunteering. Just, I don't know the Cube of Truth people who... Now that you're going on the road, where are they? And do they ever need support?
Right.
A couple hours here and there. I'd love to volunteer.
That's really cool. As far as the Anonymous for the Voiceless people, that, I may have told you this already, but that organization started a few years ago I always forget if it started in the UK or Australia. It started in Australia, I think.
Okay.
I hope I'm getting that right.
Okay.
But one of the first chapters afterwards was in the UK, I believe. Anyway, so there's chapters all over this country and many states. The AV Appleton chapter operates whether or not I'm here. I attended and I film it when I'm there, but and we did help start it, but it has its own organizer. And that is one of my favorite forms of activism as an introductory form, because you can choose how outspoken you want to be. So when you're in the cube and you're wearing a mask with a screen, like, not only are you not talking to people, but people don't even see you.
Right.
Like the person in the cube with the mask on, like, they don't even acknowledge you as a person.
Right.
They're just looking at the footage. They're not drawn to you. They're drawn to the footage. And that's actually sort of the message, right? The way that we objectify animals is the same way you end up objectifying the person holding the screen, just because they're wearing a mask. So that is like a lot of people who do activism for the first time standing in the cube end up crying behind the mask because you're watching people make the connection like 2 feet away from you,
right?
Watching the screen you're holding.
Right.
It's really, even if you don't cry, it's very impactful.
Oh, I bet.
And if you're getting curious, you can step out and you can start to shadow someone else who's having conversations. So hypothetically, if you and I were at a cube together, you just kind of hang out next to me and you just kind of listen in.
Yes.
And then as you feel your confidence get up and you start to want to talk, you just do it. You see someone standing there and you can just approach them. Hey, have you ever seen footage like this before?
Right.
You just start talking. So that's one form. But as we said, there's so many forms. And I'll just add this to it. Maybe you've already experienced this. Talking to family and or close friends about this, those are the hardest people to talk to about it. You'd think it would be the other way around.
I agree.
The closer you are to someone and the more intimate your relationship, the harder it is to address these issues.
Yes.
That's another one of the reasons why, for me, activism was such like a saving grace, and it helped me deal with a lot of the frustration and anger. How did you describe it earlier? After watching those environmental movies, you described it as sort of like a despair, maybe?
Despair and grief.
Despair and grief. Like, becoming active for me was the antidote to that.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to talk to my family, and I was trying to talk to my friends and the musicians I was touring with, and that just backfired every time. But becoming active and something about speaking with strangers, no one's bringing any baggage to the conversation, and you have nothing to lose, because the worst thing that happens is you get in an argument and you never see them again.
Right.
Something about that, everyone's walls get let down, and you end up having these very meaningful, intimate conversations right away.
Right.
Because no one has anything to lose. So
that's so awesome.
So that's all I was going to say. It's like I would advise you not to be hard on yourself if a conversation with your best friend or with a family member doesn't go well.
Or you fail miserably because you can't remember all the stuff that it takes a while to have it to be second nature.
Knock on the door. Come on in. He's back. So, that all I was saying, I think it's so awesome that you want to become active in some way and find a way of communicating this. And I think you should. And I encourage you, the same thing you're doing with vegan cheese is what I think you should do with activism, which is just experiment and try things out.
Right.
And maybe you'll try something and hate it.
Yeah.
But maybe you'll try something else and like it.
Right.
And as Hans said, like, let it find you, like, be willing to take a risk and see what you like. And they're all legitimate. They're all good.
Yes. Well, the world needs more people like you. I mean, truly. To get out there, and I know there's probably lots and lots of vegan activists.
The world needs more people like you too.
Well, that's and more people like you. It's a love fest. All right. Yeah, Mutual Admiration Society right here.
And on that
Benny,
note,
thank you.
On that note, let me wrap this up by reading just a couple quotes I wrote down. People said about you in the comments. I wrote down some Keevie quotes too.
Please.
I thought it would be a nice end point. What an open-minded woman. She is lovely. She is so great. I wish my mom was like that. I wish everyone could be as open-minded and self-skeptical as her.
Oh, I am self-skeptical. That is for darn sure.
Not to be confused with self-critical.
And that too.
Well, yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
What a beautiful woman. We'd all love a mother like this lady.
Aww.
And then lastly, what a wonderful woman to have a conversation with. Hans is a lucky guy to have such a caring mom.
Yes, I am.
Oh my God.
Yes, I am.
That's so cool.
I love her.
That's so cool. Well, I mean, you guys, this was so cool. I'm just delighted.
Yeah.
I really am.
Well, meeting you and being able to keep in touch afterwards.
Oh,
and
Benny.
Then this podcast, this is just legendary.
I'm so excited for you and what you're doing. And I can't wait for you to come back and tell us more about it.
Yeah, same here. I'm going to do what you're talking about doing. I'm just going to keep trying new things too.
Right.
And seeing what fits.
Yes.
And what works. That's what this whole podcast is.
Okay.
And we'll report back in. We'll see how it's all going.
I'm going to be scheming because I love coming up with new ideas, and I could probably come up with a page of ideas for you.
You could probably help me out quite a bit.
Send you out into the world, and can you try this? Can you try this?
Yeah, I would love that.
Someday I might try it, but I got to learn a little bit more.
And Hans, maybe you could teach me to skate.
Let's shred. Come
You
on.
want to go to the mini
let's
ramp
get
in the
it.
garage?
Yeah, that would be good. Maybe. I mean, I can't even skate on a flat surface.
Oh yeah.
So,
then, no.
so maybe not the mini ramp.
No.
Oh yeah, we'll shred the gnar.
All right. Well,
Thanks, Benny.
we gotta go shred the gnar.
Good
and,
luck. Keep rocking it.
otherwise
You
we
are
keep
so
going.
awesome. Thank you. Thank you. You have
Thank
really
you.
changed my life.
You've changed mine and clearly many other people's from the
Well,
likes and comments on that video.
here's to you,
You're
boy.
going to continue to change lives. I know it.
Yeah.
Oh, we never did this. But that was good.
Secret
Hans?
handshakes.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Benny.
much, guys.
Thank you.
All right, until next time.